All right. Hello from Village. I'm Erin Parsons, the candle making specialist with Village Craft and Candle. And I'm really excited today. I'm going to be chatting with Wade Thomas. He is the founder of Black Tie Barn in the United States, a very successful candle business. And he also runs a very popular YouTube channel under the same name. So thank you so much for joining me today, Wade.
Of course. Thanks for reaching out. Happy to do it.
Great. So I always like to start off these talks finding out, one, how long you've been in the industry, and then two, how you got into candle making.
Sure. So the first answer would be I've been in the candle industry, I would say, for about 12 years. That's when I first started. Black Tie Barn has only been around since 2014. Prior to that, I was doing more just kind of direct things under my name and mostly kind of wholesale things like that. So I didn't really start my own brand in a Black Tie Barn until 2014. Mm-hmm. The way I got started, which actually have a funny kind of video about it, is it was completely by accident. I've always worked corporate. So I do like the business aspect of things, but I've also been sort of always wanting to do something more creative and handcrafted. Well, my girlfriend at the time was a huge candle avid burner, so she was buying a bunch of the normal brands, and I made a stupid early new boyfriend comment that you're never supposed to make, and it was just talking about how she was spending so much money on candles, and she made a joke back that she wouldn't have to spend the money if I could learn how to make them. So that's kind of what started it. And you're trying to impress someone early on. So I tried, and I bought a bunch of random materials that it did not go well. It was horrible. My first candles were train wrecks. They tunneled down the middle, couldn't smell a thing. And then I guess to kind of summarize it all after that point, that caught my attention because I thought, well, this will be no big deal. And then I found that it was more involved than I thought. So that interested me. And that's what kind of got me going. And I didn't really make another candle after that point for about a year. I did nothing but just research and learn things and talk with people and reached out to some partners and industry leaders and started asking questions, and then kind of took off from there. So.
Oh, that's awesome. So where did the name Black Tie Barn come from?
Actually, very related to that same answer. So because I'd always been involved in more corporate stuff, I have always been more of the business type person. And so my attire was always suits and ties, and not necessarily suits and ties, but business, and then I was combining that with more of the rustic nature of making candles. So I combined the black tie with the barn. So kind of rustic elegance was the kind of thing I was going for. And I wasn't too sure how I liked the way it sounded, the way it rolled off the tongue, but I'm not one that's very good at making a decision and just being happy with it for a long period of time. So I wasn't super content. So I spent just countless months and even years later, I was still always thinking about other names. And it got to the point where everyone just told me, no, leave it. We like it. Stop messing with it. And so I've stopped messing with it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's a great name. So as you've been going along, what are some of the more memorable challenges that you've faced? I mean, aside from the startup where you were learning the candle making, what other challenges have you faced?
Well, recently, I think it's been mostly what everyone's been experiencing, and that is supply chain issues with stock, and then pricing. I mean, everything seems like it's gone up 70%, especially wax. So I think recently we can all probably agree it's pretty similar problems. And then now there's the whole risk of, because it is not a necessity, there's a lot of fear about starting a business or making and selling candles during a time where people are trying to be a little bit tighter. The good news is, and this is something I learned early on, is while it is technically a commodity, not a necessity, 9 out of 10 homes still burn candles no matter what's going on. Mm-hmm. And the way I looked at it is, the less people are out doing things and trying to save money, the more they're spending time at home. And so that actually can help candle sales. So from that perspective, I wasn't as worried as others were. And I didn't really see much of an issue with that. But supply, management and supply stock and pricing has been the biggest challenge recently. Early on, it's just gaining traction. And there are shortcuts to gain traction, running ads, really doing a lot of heavy marketing, which I do encourage doing that if people can, but it should always be subsidized, in my opinion, or supplemented with organic growth as much as possible, because the ads and spend will get you going faster, but organic will make you last longer. So keeping the two together, I think, is really important. But the struggle is when you're first starting out, a lot of people don't have the money to invest in ads. And so that's why it can take a lot longer to get going. So I would say getting traction early on, being patient without giving up, making sure you're focused on making good products and let the traffic kind of grow as it can. And if you have the ability to invest in ad spend and marketing, then that will fast forward the timeline for you. But that's not an option for everyone. So I didn't really dabble in that for a long time myself. And I'm not a big social media person. I mean, it's just kind of odd. I mean, I've got a YouTube channel, and yeah, I know it sounds kind of silly, but I don't enjoy very much the social media part, as far as like Instagram posts and Facebook posts and TikTok. And I don't even know that I don't enjoy it. I just don't have time to do it. So that's always been a struggle for me. Whereas other people, that's their thing and they're very good at that. And so that's easy for them. So I think we're all going to have our own individual problems and issues to work through. And so it's going to be different for everyone. But, you know, I have the tendency to spread myself too thin. And so I think one of the biggest lessons for me that I learned over the years was keeping it simple, much more simple early on, and getting focused on one thing at a time. And that would make things a lot easier. So,
yeah. So somebody who is,
I kind of went all over the place.
Yeah, no, that was awesome. Somebody who is early on in this, like who loves candles, interested in maybe starting to make their own and has no idea where to begin. What type of advice would you have for somebody like that?
I'm trying to think of the most succinct way to put it. You know, I go into a lot of detail, actually, even in a recent video about if I were starting right now from scratch, what I would do if I was starting in 2023. So that does go into a lot more detail. But I think the way to summarize, I think the most important steps is keeping it simple by trying to, I would consider, I think it depends, first of all, are you wanting to just make candles as a hobby, or do you have plans to sell? And I think you got to answer that question first, because it really determines kind of the rest of the roadmap. But if you're just making it as a hobby, I think the same thing is true. You still want to keep things simple, learn one jar at a time with one wax, and just nail that down, and then you can expand. From the other side of things, anyone that's interested in potentially selling and expanding over time and growing, then I think a lot of people jump straight into just buying a lot of waxes and oils and just all about testing and making products. And something I wish I would have done, and that's just why I've talked about it recently, is I think it's a better approach nowadays to start with the branding in mind first. Think about what you're going for. Do you have a certain audience, a certain type of candle you're wanting to make for certain types of customers? Because I think the more focused you can get towards the type of materials you want to make for someone, the easier it is to sell. Mm-hmm. So if you have a certain brand in mind, focus on that first, and that will help you determine the jar that you're looking for, because it'll fit your style that you're looking for. That'll help you with labeling. It makes everything easier. Right. So I would start with that, and then I would probably just get some samples, small samples of two or three different waxes based off just some research and just feedback from different suppliers like yourself as a starting point. And then make a couple basic candles with those waxes, the same couple oils, fragrances, and whatever wick recommendations you get. And then based off of that early test, you'll have a pretty good feel of like which one you like better. Yep. And then once you know that, you can rule everything else out of the side, get rid of all the complication, and just focus on that wax, work on making several candles, add a few more fragrances, and just slowly and methodically start to build out and do more testing. But it's so easy with the hundreds of thousands of fragrance oils and options for waxes and everything to just get overwhelmed. So I know it sounds very cliche, but just keeping it as simple as possible early on will prevent burnout, and it will give you more focus and vision. And the more you can do that, I feel like it just makes every other part of the process so much easier. You've got time to figure out things like how to run a business. You've got time to figure out inventory management, how to handle orders, and how to do shipping and all that stuff.
Yeah.
You can learn that from anyone, anywhere. So focus on products and branding would be my suggestion early on. And I could talk on that for hours, so I don't really want to do that, but I'm sure no one wants to hear me talk that long. But
you would be surprised. I bet you they would be very interested in hearing what you have to say for that long.
Well, like I said, I can always go into more detail. And you mentioned the channel. I do have videos that talk about this in a lot more detail for someone that does want to just sit and listen to the same topic for an hour or whatever. That I cover all these different aspects in more detail if anyone is interested in that. So
yeah. So I'm sure from when you first got started, you probably noticed that it can be really challenging to find good, accurate, reliable candle making advice on the internet. Like there's just so much out there. And you have a really great channel and you clearly know what you're talking about. I'm curious, you're basically training and giving advice to potential competition. So I'm wondering what made you decide to start your channel?
Yeah, so that's funny that you said that. I get that question all the time. I'm not as much anymore, but I used to get it all the time. And because of that, I actually made like a funny 15-minute video. I think it's smaller than that, shorter than that. That is different than all my other videos on the channel. And it's literally just I play like 7 different characters in it. It's funny. But the reason I did that is I was answering that question in a fun way. Why I am willing to teach others how to do what I'm doing. And I get questions, is that competition? Am I worried about that? And the short answer is no. I think we all know that candles are such a high demand product and there's tons of customers. We can't all have all the customers. We all have capacity limits anyways. Yeah. Even if I could magically snap my fingers and have every candle customer in the world, I would have to close down. I can't do that. So I don't worry about it from that regard, but I also just enjoy teaching. And so I have done that kind of thing in the past, not necessarily candles, just in general. And I've always enjoyed it. And I like helping others. And I guess I like being part of a candle community that is growing together. And I don't see it as hurting one another. And the original reason I started was I used to do paid consultations quite a bit. And that was just so hard to keep up with. And if I did spend too much time doing that, it was kind of hurting my other business, my normal business a little bit, because I didn't have time to do both. And I was having to turn down people quite a bit. So someone mentioned, well, why not do a YouTube channel? And you could help a lot more people at the same time. And I actually said no to that for like years. I was just like, I don't have time for that. And I ended up doing it. I got started kind of late. I mean, the channel's only had its first, I guess, complete full year this past year. Oh, wow. And yeah, so I wish now that I would have started sooner, but so that was the main reason, was a way that I can still help and engage and have fun teaching and reach more people with less time. Right. But it actually ended up becoming like a whole other side of the business now, which is nice. That was I didn't really know about that when I started it. I'd heard a little bit about it, but I didn't know much. And so now that I had got it going, it's now kind of developed. And so I've got, Black Tie Barn, the direct to consumer side of selling products. And then I've got my, Black Tie Barn, the B2B. So I'm selling to businesses and doing filling services. But then I also have this educational side. And so it's been a complete bonus that it's turned into like this other business stream, this business side. But that's been nice, because it allows me to kind of reinvest and to keep offering more content and do more resources and test products and things like that. So I got started as a more efficient way to just keep involved and keep helping. And then it just kind of worked itself in over the past year into another side of the business. Yeah. So it's been really, really rewarding and really cool. And I feel like I get to know a lot more people in the industry. Yeah. And I do a lot of traveling and road trips for business reasons. And when I do them, I get to just meet a lot of these people too that I communicate with and it's talk with on the channel, which is really, really neat. So I've got 2 more this summer and going different directions. And so it'll be another chance I get to meet suppliers and manufacturers, of course, but also get to meet people that I talk with all the time. So.
Oh, that's awesome. So you've mentioned a few things that people can see on your channel. What are some of the other things that people can expect to find when they go and check out your channel? What types of information can they find there?
I try to keep it a little bit for everyone. So there's a pretty good split, I'd say, between videos about specifically making candles and products. So like demonstrations, tutorials, those kind of interactive videos. And then I have videos that are more talking head videos, sort of like this, where I'm doing the teaching and explaining without necessarily showing. So things that require more talking, I guess, more instruction. And then another third of the businesses, if not more, are related to running a candle business. And that one was one that I kind of saw the biggest gap in as far as educational resources online. As you kind of pointed out, when I started, there were other candle channels, and some that are good. I was having a hard time looking for finding information that was relevant to the questions I had, and questions people are asking me. So the first thing I did was try to target those kind of questions. But then, as you kind of pointed out too, and I don't mean this in any kind of negative way at all, but I was finding a lot of different or misinformation. And my goal was to try to clarify a lot of that as possible, because I think for the most part, everyone is always trying to help, which is awesome. And that's why the community has grown as much as it has, is you've got so many people willing to help, which is amazing. But sometimes you're getting, some of those people are getting asked to help or getting asked questions that they haven't necessarily come across yet, or maybe they haven't had experience with. And so they either can't answer it or they have to speculate. And then you start getting a lot of information that's just all over the place. And so my goal was to try to provide information on things I did have experience with that I thought could be valuable or helpful. But a lot of information is also opinionated. Candle making is fun because it's an art, and while there is science involved, there are several ways to do the same thing. And so two makers might be doing things entirely differently, and both be completely successful. So you do get a variety of different ways to do things. But then there are certain things like business that there's just certain things you kind of have to do a certain way, and certain things you need to know. And I wanted to provide as much information as I could from my experience. And I'm usually pretty open on the channel. As if there's something I don't know or have experience with, I just say that this is not my field of expertise, but here's what I do. And then, so I do my best to try to be as transparent about that as possible. But mostly a variety between candle making tutorials, instructional videos, and business related content.
Okay. So you're talking to a lot of your followers, obviously, it sounds like. So what are some of the top questions that you're hearing over and over and over again?
Some of it depends on the time of year. When we get to fall, you start getting a lot of questions about how to do like craft shows and things. Fortunately, lots of resources on that. There are a lot of other makers that do a lot more craft shows than I do anymore. I used to do them a lot a while ago. I just don't do very much anymore. So some of it is time of year related. Going into every season, you always get questions about what type of scents do well in certain seasons. So again, you can get tons of answers from that from tons of different people. But I would say from a general all year long perspective, the number one question always is, what wick should I use with this jar? And it's a very simple question, and we all get it all the time. And the answer is always the same, and that is, well, it depends. Can you tell me more about the materials you're using? And for brand new makers, that can be frustrating or not seem very helpful, but it truly is the question you have to ask first. And you just can't help without knowing more information. So most of the questions tend to be about wicking, I would say. And secondly would be, and when they ask about wicking, I ask about their jar and the wax. And then if I have experience with those, I try to relay a decent starting point. And then if I don't, I try to pass them to someone that I think might have more information on it. Or I'll point them to like a Facebook group or something where they can get a lot of different answers.
Right.
The next question is always, how can I get better hot throw? And which wax will give better hot throw? And that's always a really troubling waters to try to navigate, because as you know, there are several ways to do the same thing. And so even if like two people could be using the exact same materials and someone can have good hot throw and the other person might not. And it's almost impossible to answer that directly. If for no other reason, just the object or the subjectivity of scent throw. One person might be more sensitive and smell something a lot easier than the next person. You know, I've got some of my own products that I don't think they are super strong, and then I'll have someone else test it and they're like, "Oh, tone it down, it's too strong."
Yeah.
What? So, and vice versa. There's others that I think are great, and I was like, I don't really like that.
Yeah.
So it's hard to give straight answers when you're talking about a subjective nature like scent throw.
Yeah.
So I do try to relay general information about the different types of waxes, and every wax has pros and cons and different characteristics, and none of them are perfect. So you might find one that has the best hot throw you've ever had, but it's going to have something else you don't like. It could be the texture, it could be how hard it is to wick. And then you'll find other ones that you love everything about it, but you don't want to wait the weeks to finally start smelling something, or you don't want to deal with how picky it is on fragrance oils and things like that. So I try to ask them what's the most important thing to them first. And I had made, this has been a couple years ago, I don't even know if it's still up or not, but I had made this little Excel program thing that it's like a wax rating thing. So it's got like 10 or 12 different categories, and it lets them sort it by what's most important to them. Is the fact that it's 100% natural the most important, or they want strongest scent throw, or are they looking for a certain melt point, for example? And once they organize it how they want, then it can spit out some suggestions.
Okay.
And something like that. Anyways, It's been a while. But I think it's most important to find out what's most important to you first, and then go from there. And then trying to keep in mind that it's not going to be perfect. If there was one perfect wax, we'd all be using it. And that's why we're all using different things.
Right.
So scent throw and wax recommendations. Just
What's
those
your
are,
favorite wax to work with?
I don't have one, unfortunately, for the same reasons we just talked about. And the reason for me too, not only that I'm always on the hunt for something a little bit better. I'm always doing that. But the reason it's hard for me to answer it is I use several different ones. Some for my own products and some for other companies that I'm making candles for. And it's like every time I make one, I like another one better. And then, so I get my hands on so many. I would say that, there's really consistent, reliable performers. Something like a traditional like IGI 6006 is so common and popular. And the reason a wax like that can be good, even though it's definitely got its negatives, it's good though, because there's so many people that use it. And if there's a lot of people using it, it's a lot easier to get help with it. Another really popular one is a kind of a lower melt point parasoy wax, something like now I'm drawing a blank, and I should have had like the website up to talk about them, but I guess
6006. So I love that you use the 6006.
Yeah, well, there you go. So and that one's a great one because it's got first of all, it's a blend, and for the most part, blends tend to work better, I think. But it also has good hot throw for almost all fragrances. There can be some that you'll find that maybe aren't great, but that's usually, you can just replace the oil. It's a lot easier to find an oil than it is a new wax.
Right.
It also has a higher melt point than most container blends do. So it ships a lot easier during the summer, in my experience. It's got a melt point near 130, where a lot of other soys and parasoys are 120 or so. So that's an advantage. I think the most generic way to answer your question, though, is I think the parasoys are still my favorite type of wax in general. I know that's a very vague answer because there's so many specific ones, but para coconuts or coconut soys have gotten a lot more popular, and for good reason. I understand all the advantages of them, but for consistency, fragrance to fragrance, wicking, all the time. I find the Parasols for me are a little bit more consistent. But I think truly the right answer for everyone is just whichever one you get used to is going to be your favorite one. And it's really hard to get convinced otherwise. And I feel like that's the case with a lot of things. We get very used to what we use and what we like, and we'll defend that, until the end. And so I don't know, it's probably not the greatest answer. I use probably 7 different waxes regularly. And 6006 is maybe, a fifth of that. So they're all pretty evenly used. So, and there are also some waxes, I should say, sorry to cut you off. There are some waxes that are not necessarily available to standard public through regular suppliers that you can only get from manufacturers. And I use those for some of the larger clients. So I'm not really counting those because it's harder for someone to get started using those kind of waxes. So.
Yeah, for sure. Do you use essential oils in any of your candles?
Only the ones that are pre-blended with the fragrance oil.
Okay.
That come already included. I don't add any essential oils directly myself for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of fragrance oils already have some, which is great. But the cost of essential oils is high. The reliability of them, only some of them really throw fragrance really well. And you just got to be more careful with them. And it's hard to scale with those too. I've noticed, at least in my experience, when I've worked with larger orders, they're trying to get costs down, and you're adding essential oils, costs just go up. So a lot of it's just based around what your business goals are and who you're working with. I like a little bit included in the fragrance oils, but I like to stick with products that are kind of specifically made for the craft rather than something that can be used for all sorts of different things. I just find that they perform a little bit better, but it's going to be different for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Well, that pretty well covers all the questions that I had for you. I mean, this has been probably one of my favorite talks. You have so much knowledge. So I definitely recommend that everyone check out your YouTube channel, and it's Black Tie Barn.
Yeah, I occasionally change the name a little bit, but you can find it by searching Black Tie Barn. And I appreciate that. And I like to share the knowledge that I do have and the experience that I do have. But more exciting, I think, and hopefully here I'll be doing this soon on the channel, is there's also a ton that I don't know or that I don't have experience with. And so my goal is to incorporate more and more people into the channel that are experts in certain things. So, kind of like we're doing here, I want to involve some other industry leaders, whether it be some, manufacturers or people that have worked in the field for a long time or use materials that I don't necessarily use. Because my goal is to help everyone, not just help people that use what I use. So, so I'm going to do what I can and then supplement the rest. So. Oh,
that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Wade.
Sure. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.